So, hi everybody. Hi. Today I invited a special guest, Miss Kara Lairson from IB department. She's an English teacher in IB, and I want Miss Kara to introduce her favorite book to our capital student. So, Miss Kara, would you like to say a few words to our capital student, please?
Yeah, of course. Hi, my name is Kara. As Mr. Shin said, I am an English teacher in the IB department. I teach English B. I'm also the theater teacher, and I am what I would consider to be an avid reader. Um, so I think reading is incredibly important for a multitude of reasons. Reading not only improves your reading comprehension, obviously, but it also improves your vocabulary, and I think it also broadens your perspectives of the world around you, especially if you're reading, many different genres of literature, from different countries across the world. And thank you so much, Mr. Shin, for
Oh,
setting this
my
up and for inviting me to talk about reading.
my pleasure. My pleasure. So I asked Miss Kara before to recommend us three books. So the first book that Miss Kara recommend for us for the student is Fahrenheit 451. So would you like to introduce the book for us, please, Miss Kara?
Of course. One of the reasons why I chose Fahrenheit 451 is
Mm-hmm.
because I also read it in high school. I had to read it I had to read it this summer, I think, before my third year of high school for my
Mm-hmm.
AP English class.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Fahrenheit 451 is it's a dystopian novel by Ray Bradbury that's set very much in the future in a world where books are illegal. People are not
Oh.
allowed to keep books.
Mm.
Keeping them actually, results in people just disappearing. And firefighters, instead of putting out fires, they start them, and
Mm.
they start them on piles of books. So, people that are discovered to have books in their home, whether it be, a really simple sort of novella, or all the way up until people keeping different versions of the Bible.
Mm.
Any book that's found is an illegal,
Wow.
it's illegal material, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think right now there's also all of these elements of all these technological advances, and there are so many parallels, I think, in the world that we
Wow.
experience now. And Ray Bradbury was a really interesting guy in that he sort of predicted a lot of the technology that we use today, not
Mm.
just in Fahrenheit 451, but in some of his short stories as well.
Mm.
And I'm a big fan of dystopian literature.
Okay.
I
So sorry for interruption, Kara. I have a question. I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
So honestly speaking, like about a year ago, I tried to read this book, Fahrenheit, and I read a couple of pages, just one or two pages, and it was really boring. It bored me. So I kind of stopped reading. And the first question there about this book was the title, like Fahrenheit 451. I think this Fahrenheit is the unit of measuring the degree of Celsius,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, what do you think is the meaning of this title of this book?
Well, actually, so 451 degrees is the temperature that it takes to burn paper.
Oh, I
So
see.
the whole title of the book is about essentially burning paper, so burning paper books, because
Mm,
technology, watching television, listening to television, engaging with technology has become the common stance of this society. And
mm,
so it's all about burning paper and removing books from society, because the
mm,
government in this book has come to believe that people who read sort of rebel against the government. They learn too
mm,
many ideas. They have too
mm,
many thoughts. And in order to sort of keep people contained, they burn all of the books. So the temperature, it's actually so Fahrenheit. Actually, I don't know what temperature that is in Celsius.
mm. It's
I'm an
okay.
American,
Doesn't matter. I just
so
was wondering the meaning of the title itself, and it
yeah,
explains. Okay.
yeah.
So, what do you think is the key takeaway of this book, in your opinion?
In my opinion, so my favorite quote actually comes from this book, my very favorite
Mm,
quote of all time. And the
Mm-hmm.
quote is, if they give you lined paper, write the other way. So if somebody gives you lined paper, turn it and write across the lined paper. And for
Mm.
me, the biggest takeaway is to constantly question your environment. It's to seek a higher understanding, to not just accept the status quo, to
Mm.
push yourself to challenge, people around you. And,
Mm.
I think it's really important, especially for our students, to recognize, that there's going to be things they encounter in the world that they maybe don't agree with. And it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to not agree with the world. It's okay to want things to be different. It's okay to learn about a variety of topics, and we should never be afraid of knowledge. We should always be ready to sort of absorb knowledge as it comes to us.
Mm.
And most importantly, I think it also warns of just the dangers of relying too much on technology.
Mm.
And, as a person who really loves my social media, and as a person that spends a lot of time on the internet, I also need to take that lesson away. But I think
Mm.
for me, the biggest takeaway from it is to always keep learning,
Mm.
always seek information.
Interesting. Okay, good. So maybe, wow, your explanation makes me want to read this book again.
I,
So,
I will say that the first few pages are boring, but once you get into learning about the firefighters, and once you get into sort of like the climax and like learning about Guy Montag, the main character, I think it
mm-hmm.
gets a lot more interesting because of all of the conflict that you see between him and the fire captain, Beatty.
Mm.
Their sort of conflict and the tension between them is really, I think it really makes the book interesting. So you should definitely give it a second shot, Mr.
Sure.
Shin.
Yes, I will. I will. Great, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, of
So
course.
moving on to a second book. Okay. So actually, by the way, this is Elmo. Okay. Hi, my
Hi,
assistant.
Elmo. How's it
Okay.
going?
Good, good. So the second book is the perks of being a wallflower. So would you like
Yes,
to introduce the book to us, please?
of course. So this was actually turned into a movie. So some of our students might have actually seen the movie adaptation, because it
Mm.
has Emma Watson in it. And I know
Oh.
that a lot of students really like Emma Watson, because of her, in the Harry Potter movies, and a lot of students have seen her speech, at, I think, the UN. She's like an ambassador, to
Mm.
the United Nations, but she also starred in this movie. But it originally started as a book. And one of the reasons why I chose this book is because it is a really amazing sort of coming of age,
Mm.
novel.
Okay.
And so I read this in high school also.
Mm.
But it essentially tells the story of a boy named Charlie, who was an outcast, and he just goes through all of these different sort of obstacles and all of these difficulties as a teenager. And for me, I think it's a really amazing book for teenagers to read, especially if they feel like they are alone in dealing with bullying, or if they're
Mm.
alone in dealing with the obstacles of growing up. I think growing up, especially for teenagers, is a really lonely experience sometimes, because we often think that we are the only people, that experience certain things. We're the only people that feel alone. We're the only people that feel sad, or we're the only
Mm.
people that feel outcast. And this book, I think, is a really incredible sort of, um, it's a really incredible book, I think, that serves to show that we are not alone, and that all of
Interesting.
us deal with like really, really difficult, life changes, not just as
Mm.
teenagers, but even as we move into like adulthood and graduation. And you know I just I so it's a really amazing book, and it also deals with a lot of really sort of sensitive, heavy topics, but it does it in such a way, I think, that's really educational and really informative,
I
for
see.
teenagers.
So, you mentioned that the protagonist of this book is a boy, right? So
Hmm.
I didn't read the book, so I don't know anything about it. I just have a question about the language. So
Of course.
when we talk about the wallflower, I think about girls first. Girls who goes to party and she's unpopular. No one asks for a
Mm.
dance. So this wallflower for me seems to be related to girls or women. But I
Yeah.
guess is this like a gender neutral word?
Yeah. And so, like, the word wallflower, just describes somebody who is really shy.
Mm.
someone who like doesn't, really want to be in the center of attention. If you think so, as an American, I went to a lot of school dances. We had a lot of school dances. So like we had like prom and we had our homecoming dance and all of these things. And a wallflower is somebody that, you is literally like standing against the wall, sort of like a vine growing on a wall. They just stand there and they observe and they watch. And so a wallflower, yeah, it's a
Okay.
gender neutral term. But I can understand, I think, why you would immediately think about girls, because the
Mm.
idea of like a flower, right? It's a very sort of, flowers are like, I think, viewed as pretty feminine. But the
Mm.
actual concept itself of wallflower is very gender neutral and can, discuss either like young men or young women who are just really shy. Maybe they struggle to like make friends, or they struggle to sort of get involved. Your standard introvert, I
Okay.
think, would probably, yeah.
So as you know, careful, we have both boys and girls. So
Hmm.
in you believe that the boys also will have fun reading this book.
I think so.
Mm.
I think for the boys, I think reading from a boy's perspective, I think there are a lot of coming of age novels that center around young women.
Mm-hmm.
And they center around young women like growing up and like romantic relationships and like fights with their friends. But I think Perks of Being a Wallflower, because it is from like a young man's perspective, I
Okay.
definitely think that it would be, yeah, I think it would be great for like young men to read, because there's so much stigma that surrounds like young men and their emotional expression and like growing up and like being able to talk to people and being vulnerable and open. And Charlie is such a great protagonist and is so vulnerable and is so open and
Mm.
experiences so many things, that I think he's a great sort of, I don't want to say role model, but
Mm.
he is a great sort of character to look at, um,
Okay.
that like I think a lot of young men can identify with.
Okay.
So yeah, I definitely, I think both, yeah, young men and young women would really, really enjoy this novel.
Just one quick last question about the book. Spoiler alert. Is this a happy ending or tragic ending? The book.
It is not necessarily the most uplifting, but
Okay.
I think it is realistic.
Okay.
And I think that that's one of the best things about the book, is
Mm.
it doesn't try to fool you with this idea of how
Oh.
everything sort of wraps up really neat and tidy. And
Oh,
I
I
think our
see.
teenagers know that like a lot
Mm.
of life
Right.
doesn't end in a super neat,
Oh.
tidy, compact way, that life
Right.
is really messy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the ending of this book is like really representative and really
Oh.
realistic of like a teenager's life, all of our lives actually, because
Wow.
life is really difficult and it's messy.
It's even more interesting. It sounds even more interesting. Okay. Good. Good.
Yeah, I
Okay.
loved it. I love it, and it's a great movie too. And I would
Mm.
encourage, if our students haven't seen the movie, to read the book and to watch the movie. And I think it helps on, not only comprehension but also to figure out the differences between like our books and our movies, and the differences in media, and like, what sort of is evident in a book that might be really hard to translate into, digital, sort of visual media. So, but I would encourage both of them actually, because I think both of them are really, really great
Oh.
pieces of entertainment.
Interesting. Interesting. So that's why you're having a Emma Watson look today. Emma Watson style.
Actually, I just bought this shirt, so like I just
Looks
really
good.
wanted to wear it today. But yeah, I mean, I feel very sort of, I feel very Harry Potter, quite honestly. But
Looks good on you. Yes.
it's a
Pretty
great
look.
feeling.
Yes. Oh wow. Good. So last but not least, we were liars. So what is this book about, please?
So this is a book that I read actually. So before I moved to Korea, I worked
Mm.
at both a bookstore and at a public library. I worked at
Mm.
both of them at the same time. And what I saw was this book was one of the most popular books sold in my bookstore, and it was also one of the most
Oh.
popular books checked out at my
Oh
library.
really?
And
Mm.
so it's a young adult book, but my favorite thing about it, and the reason why I chose it, is because it's a mystery book. And it's
Mm.
really sort of vague, and it's really full of all of these like dark twists and turns. And um, this would be really good for students that really like more suspense type novels, that really like
Oh.
more mystery type novels, that like, they try to figure things out as they read it. And I don't want to spoil anything about it because this is legitimately one of the best books I think that I might have ever read in
Wow.
my 33 years of reading. I loved
Wow.
it. The ending was a
Really?
total surprise. There's so many twists and so many turns. But it's about a young woman who is the granddaughter of a wealthy family. And so it's about like her experiences throughout. They call it the summer of 15.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's about all of her experiences with her friends and her family at this like private, like sort of lake house that her family owns. And
Mm.
about like I don't want to call it a coming of age novel because I don't really think it's a coming of age novel, but
Mm.
it is definitely like, again, sort of centers in on the difficulties of like being a teenager and trying to sort of navigate your way through growing into yourself and your own opinions and your own perspectives and having difficulties with your family and experiencing like, if your families are fighting with each other, like living through that kind of like
Mm.
tension. But it's more of like a mystery, sort of twisty, dark novel. And so,
Mm.
I wanted to try to choose something for the third novel that I think would be, it's also a really quick read. Once you
Oh,
start reading it, it's really engaging. And I think it's really hard to put down just because
wow.
you want to know what happens after every single instance. And the more you learn about the main character,
Mm.
I think the faster that you want to read and sort of figure out what exactly is going on during this summer. So,
Right, right. It happens when you start reading a mystery novels, you want to find out the
mm,
end, so it just makes you keep reading. In terms of a level of difficulty, level of languages, do you think it's not that difficult for our student to read this book?
I think that out of probably all three of the books, this one is probably the most accessible, honestly, because
Mm.
it's a young adult book. It's classified as like young adult literature,
Okay.
whereas
Mm.
Perks of Being a Wallflower, I think, could go between either young adult or adult fiction, and I think Fahrenheit
Mm.
451 is definitely probably the most difficult out of the three. But
Mm.
this one is written. It's more contemporary than it's the most recently published out of the three.
Mm-hmm.
Fahrenheit 451 was published in the 50s. The Perks of Being a Wallflower was published, and I think in the early 2000s. And this one was published, I think, in 2012 or
Oh,
2013. So
oh,
it's
I see.
definitely the most contemporary, which means
Mm.
I think the language in it is definitely more recognizable, I think, for some
Mm-hmm.
of our students, especially if they're trying to learn like American slang or
Right.
like alternative vocabulary words. But no, I
Mm.
think out of all three of the books, this one is definitely probably the
Oh.
most accessible in terms of language.
Sounds fantastic and intriguing and interesting. Maybe definitely I should try reading this book first. Definitely.
I think actually, I'm trying to remember, I think all three of these books we have at the Gaffel Library. I'm
Oh,
not sure about this one. I know obviously Fahrenheit 451, and I'm pretty sure
right.
The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Yeah, I
But
think I saw
this
both of them.
one,
Mm,
yeah, I think this one might also be there.
mm,
But I'm not 100% certain.
right.
Um, but it's definitely worth, I think you could probably order it maybe through Kyobo
Mm-hmm.
or
Sure,
if you're interested. It should be in paperback now, so
sure.
because it's been out long enough.
Wow. Okay, good. So, hey, Miss Kara. Oh, wow. I really appreciate your introduction to
Of
books.
course.
Thank you.
I
And
love
I
I
hope.
love talking about books and I love talking about reading and I grew up, like I grew up a pretty, I was a voracious reader. When I was younger, I just constantly wanted to read. My mom took me to the library every week. I
Wow.
used to get in trouble in high school because instead of, focusing on my teacher, I would have my textbook up and I would have my novel behind my textbook and
Wow.
I would be reading my I would be reading my novel instead of listening to what was happening in like my Latin class, which don't
Wow.
do that. Don't do that, Gaffel students. Don't
Right, right,
don't read in while you should be listening to your teachers because they're trying to give you important information.
right,
Don't be reading while
right,
your teachers are talking.
right.
Don't do that.
And but nowadays students have an online class only, so they have more like spare time, I guess, for reading the books. So I guess your
Yeah.
recommendation will be a great, great information for our students. And once again, I want to say really thank you from the bottom of my heart of
Thank
of
you for
giving this
thinking of me,
list.
Mr. Shin. I feel honored. I feel honored that you chose me to talk about books. I could talk about books for days.
I'm honored to have you have my guest. Okay, thank you. See you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Enjoy the rest of your day,
Bye.
Mr. Shin.